Great. So, Amanda, thank you for joining on this episode of the Alchemy Spotlight. We're looking forward to have you here as a Chief Wonder Officer and what that's all about. So I'm sure we can learn that. We see some people joining in the chat. I'll be watching the chat for you.
Okay.
So yeah, and let's see how we get on. Alex, over to you.
Yeah. So thank you. This is mainly a recorded interview, so it will be posted into our Business Lounge feed afterwards, and for everyone to listen on their walks, on their whatever they choose. So thank you for joining us today. First of all, how was ProcureCon?
ProcureCon was amazing. It was, unfortunately, I came back with a head cold after ProcureCon / Disney World. So I am a little bit congested today. So apologize in advance. But ProcureCon was amazing, as usual. Great mix of partners of Wonder Services there, but then also some really amazing practitioners. And what I tell people all the time, Alex, is what I love about those events is the chatter that happens in the hallways. It's not so much like the presentations, but it's like the idea sharing that happens in the hallways in those light bulb moments. And I think that's a great part of what you're doing with Alchemy, is creating that community so people can have those hallway conversations all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. This is just one long hallway.
Yes.
So today is a special day, actually, that you're joining us. So today is our birthday. It's 150 days today since we launched. It's not really a birthday, but we celebrate these small moments.
Yes, absolutely.
We have members in 95 countries now, and growing. Some countries only have one person, but it's something that's growing, and we want to thank you for your support in the Alchemie Network. We're a startup, and at some stage you were a startup as well, and
Yes.
we want to learn from you ourselves today as well, because we're in that phase. So you're currently in Las Vegas.
Yes.
It's breakfast time over there.
Yes.
So again, thank you. The span of our people, we're unlikely to get people in Australia and New Zealand listening to us right now.
Mm-hmm.
And in India, they're 4.5 hours ahead here. So it's 8:30 in the evening there now. So 12.5 hours ahead of you. But we're gonna record it and we're gonna post it. I guess after that long welcome, the first thing I'd like us to just talk a little bit about is before Wonder Services,
Mm-hmm.
before you have the best job title in the world, you were doing stuff in procurement.
I was.
And you had a whole career in procurement that went into project management and went into process management, and then you became a VP of MGM experience. Tell us a little bit about that journey first, and then I'd like us to go from there about, well, how did you make that decision to say, you know what, it's time?
Okay. And it was a big decision too, and I'll get to that. But I would say, the most wonderful career in procurement. From day one, when I joined Schneider Electric, I was moving away from in-person travel agents. So I'm dating myself a little bit because I don't know if those exist in corporations anymore, but I was moving away from in-person travel agents to an online booking tool. That was my project. So from day one, I mean, if you change anything in travel, it's a big deal. It's like impacting a firstborn child. Like, it is a major change and people need to get used to it. The executives knew the travel agents knew the executives' kids. I mean, there was a really tight relationship. So I had the lovely opportunity to take that experience and expand it over several other major transformations in organizations. And they ranged from 3 SAP implementations to multiple Coupa Ariba implementations from a technology standpoint, to overhauling process, insourcing and outsourcing, leading merger and acquisitions or divestitures. I even opened 2 properties for MGM from a supply chain standpoint. So all of my work was this like massive adventure of trying to figure out how the heck to move forward and get this implementation done and get people to adopt that change. And that's really what sparked the transition into Wonder Services, because when I was at MGM, I tell everyone we took them out of like a bad 80s hairdo. We had an AS400. We had an AS400 system, which worked like a charm. Like it still works for a lot of other companies, but AS400 system, very legacy type processes. We looked at the organization, the skill set, the culture. And we did a pretty major overhaul there. It had a lot of successes, some that were not so successful in any project. Like we had a mix, but more on the success side. And then I started looking around, Alex, and I was like, I'm hearing from other procurement leaders that their transformations weren't going well. Their XYZ technology implementation didn't go well. And I started diving in and also at the same time reflecting on my career. And what I realized was, as much as they would like to say it, any procure tech is not going to transform your organization. It's just not. It's an enabler. And the things that truly transform your organization is when you understand the skill sets of your people and you change the culture and you look at your organizational structure, your processes, your data, your metrics. Like you have to look at all of that to truly transform. And but we were getting sold that a procure tech was going to do that for us. And yeah, it's a catalyst for that. Don't get me wrong, but it is. So I started looking at it, Alex, and I was like, you know what? We're finally getting money in procurement. Like that has not been the at least in my experience, it might be different for you, but we didn't get a lot of investment and we were finally getting money and we were not returning the results that people were expecting. And I was like, that's a darn shame. Like, that's just a shame. And I'm not going to let that happen. So that's what prompted me to start Wonder Services, was to really focus on that functional side of transformation, to make sure that we get the return on whatever change we're trying to drive forward. If it's tech, if it's an organizational change, if it's a merger and acquisition, et cetera.
The way you've described that takes me back to the transformation that myself and Harold did 8 years ago. So Harold led that for me. He's still trying to transform me as a person and our life. The reason we're together is because we're such opposites, but that's deliberate. And Harold actually wrote, it's part of his book, but it's called The Four-Sided Triangle, and it puts the importance around that people and processes are the key, and that the platform itself should support the processes that you want and not the other way around. And then Harold put governance at the middle. So having spent 22 years in NATO, he said, look, we're going to build this and we're going to put it right, but I'm not going to let you mess it up. So he puts governance right at the you got to have that control. And it's pretty similar to how you described it. So you reached that point, 5 years ago now?
5.5 years ago, yeah.
And what was that? How did you bring that decision home? Because I mean, you've got a beautiful family. We see them. How do you square that triangle that Harold has just talked about?
So I will say, I was thinking about this for probably a good 3 years, right?
Okay.
And I am the single income earner in my family. We decided a long time ago when we had our second daughter that my husband was going to be a stay-at-home dad. We felt very passionate about that. So think about putting it in my shoes. Here I am sitting at a really great corporate job. I tell everyone, like, working at MGM was my dream job. Loved everything about it. But yet I had this kind of like chime in my ear that I needed to do something different. And I'm the only income earner in the family. Okay. So it was, what really did it for me at the end of the day was two things. Would I go back and look at my life and have regret if I don't do it? And then the second thing was a conversation I had with my husband. My husband's been my biggest cheerleader in my entire career. And he helped me work through what is the risk to doing this? Like, what is the real risk? And we said, okay, the risk is I go out and do this, and let's just say I fall flat on my face, like just totally botch it, whatever. Even if I do that, I would have met a ton of really great people. I would have learned a crazy amount of what it takes to run a business, and in that case, fail, which is a lot of learning. And then I always had the opportunity to go back to corporate. So if you look at it that way, which he helped me create, kind of craft that. But if you look at it that way, it's like, well, there's a lot more upside. Even if I fall on my face, there's a lot more upside to this than staying where I'm currently at. So that's ultimately what did it for me.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, that's a really beautiful story. Quite often you hear those stories in reverse. So it's really nice to hear what a wonderful man your husband is.
Thank you.
And I've never had the nerve to do that. Okay, so in 40 years, I've never reached that point until I retired and had time to do it. And now I'm busier than ever. But I've never had the nerve. So fair play to you for taking that challenge, and we really respect you. So when you look at Wonder Services then, so you created that.
Yes.
What's your approach to digital transformation in procurement? How are you different from conventional consulting firms? Because you've got to have a reason to stand out. It's not just because of you. It's there's got to
Yeah,
be a
that's
few
true.
other things.
That's true. Okay, so, and you've kind of touched on this already. When I was going through transformations, there's a lot of focus on people, process, and technology, right? And you've thrown in governance, which is great. When I took a step back, I said there are two foundational things that I think we need to be thinking about differently. One is, what are all of those different levers of change that we should be considering? And we developed 8 different areas. So we expanded on people, process, and technology. We included data and metrics, organization, policy, and culture. Okay. So when we go into a transformation, yes, there's usually a technology involved, and that's one of the levers, right? But we take a very comprehensive approach to this change. And that's why a lot of people are like, hey, you're really focused on change management. And that's really the heart of what we're doing, because at the end of the day, you can make all of these investments. And if people don't adopt what you're trying to push forward, it's not going to return what you want. And that was consistently what I was hearing from others in organizations, the ones that were having a lot of struggle. It was like, hey, my suppliers aren't adopting this. The people aren't doing the requisitions. We invested in X, Y, and Z, and we're getting 5% of our spend going through it. It's like that has to change. So we took a very comprehensive approach to this. So that's one, like blowing up that whole infrastructure and saying we need to do a better job thinking through this holistically. The other area that I would say is that we also realized that our leaders were not prepared to lead the change. You guys have lived through it. You know what it takes. Like, it takes a ton of energy, a ton of strategy, relationship building, listening. Like, there's all kinds of aspects that go into leading change. And so we developed out a methodology called ALICE. So you might be able to tie Alice and Wonder together. It kind of plays nicely with each other. ALICE is our way of helping leaders lead change without burning out, right? So it's a way to maximize your energy, maximize your focus, and get the results that you need as you're leading a change, because those were the two areas that I saw were really deficient in the previous experiences that I had. The other core stuff is pretty similar, but those two I would say differentiate us quite a bit. And then the third thing, I'll just chime in because I'm very, very passionate about this, and you guys might have a different perspective on it. But when I was in corporate, I had a lot of consultants come in with really good theories, right? Like, in theory, this would work really well, but they had never sat in the seat before. right? And so there's only so much that you could take that theory into implementation because they had not had that experience. So when we bring in our consultants, every single one of our leads has sat in the seat of a practitioner before. They've actually done the work in corporate, so they know what it takes to lead that type of transformation successfully for an organization.
Yeah. When I think that my first experience of implementing something like this was probably about, I'm dating myself now, but it's probably a good 15 years ago when we were looking to move from a basic version of Oracle to an early version of SAP. And
Yeah.
we bought Capgemini in. And Capgemini said, look, we're going to need some people on this process. You know, we need people, physical people, to sit in a room and work with us on this project. And the leader of Capgemini came to see me and said, look, you guys are not taking this seriously. And I said, well, what do you mean we're not taking it seriously? He said, well, it's like you walk around the building with a bell saying, bring out your dead. And rather than putting the best people, because you're trying to transform the business, you're trying to change it from here to here, you put your absolute best on, and quite often you get dross because they want to do it, but they don't really want to do it. They want it to just turn up and start working without any effort from their side. So one of the biggest challenges you have, I think, on day one is, even though they're asking you to come and do the work, you've still got to sell the importance to them so they sit in the room and own it. Because if Harold talks about extreme ownership, if he's all over me, so if you don't have that, then they're going to fail. And that's how do you sell that to them? What your role is on this. It's not just on me. You have a role to play.
Oh, and that's why we took a focus on change leadership, because if you can train the leaders to do what they need to do to lead that change, they're going to own it more effectively. But it also comes down, Alex, to and Harold, you'll probably get a kick out of this. It comes down to little things. So I've walked into implementations where the SI is leading the steerco conversation. And just because of that alone, I know the project is not going to be successful. It's those little things. Like if you as a leader in an organization who is transforming and you're not the one presenting that steerco update, there is a serious problem on this project. Yeah. Right. So it's those little things that I just noticed along the way. You're like, no, that's not going to happen anymore. We need to change this and explain to the leader why it's important for them to be presenting, because they're the ones that need to own it long after an SI is gone, right? So when we come into an organization, we make sure that we point out those things, but then we also help them, like they need to be the ones that are having the one-on-ones with the influencers in the organization. They're the ones that need to make sure that the town halls are happening, right? We often get asked, well, you guys, as change leads, you guys know the story, you can tell the story. And I'm like, yeah, we can tell the story all day long. But I'm going to train you on how to tell a story because you're the one that needs to own this.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Yeah.
Harold, you're on mute, Harold.
You're on mute. I'm sure it was brilliant, whatever you said. You were very excited.
You're still on mute, but I'll translate. So it's one of the things that Harold also runs an organization called Transformation Executives, and he follows a similar path to how you've just described that. And one of the things that Harold talks about is the fact that something like 79%, I think it's 79%, Harold, of transformations actually fail. And they fail for all of those reasons that you've just described. And when you don't do it properly, when you don't have the right people, then there is an abject failure going to happen. And that's one of the things that Harold describes himself on some of his material as being a Sherpa. So he's going to change the odds. He's going to help you get to the summit. You want to get to the summit, but without me, you're not going to get there.
And oh my gosh, Harold, we need to talk more, Harold, because I actually, the project leads on my teams, I always mention to them, and my marketing team hates it, by the way, but I always describe them as Sherpas because they've been there, they sat in the seat, they can guide people through the transformation and think through what they need to be doing from a leadership standpoint to make sure that this change is adopted. So that it's a great way to describe kind of what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I also used to expect him to book the restaurant though and decide where we're going to go and what time the taxi is coming. So it was a bit more than just making the transformation work, but it absolutely worked well together. So what would you say are some of the common challenges that procurement organizations face when embracing on a digital transformation journey? I think you've probably touched on some of them already.
Yeah, I would say that the biggest thing that I see from, I'm just going to talk about the leaders because a lot of this starts with the leadership and how they're framing the change. But what I see from leaders often is that they truly have drank the Kool-Aid to believe that the tech and the SI are going to transform their organization and they're going to take the lead on that. And that is what we were just talking about. It's not, that's not going to happen that way. So and I've talked to leader after leader, like I've had XYZ SI come in. I thought they were going to transform my organization. And it's like, well, no, like their role, and I tell leaders this all the time, depending on, how your engagement is structured, but for the most part, if they're in as an SI, their role is to get the technology up and running, to configure it, to do the integrations. Like that's really their role. Their role is not to transform your organization, even though they might be saying that, that's not actually what they do. So that's the biggest thing. Like, I think there needs to be a big education process with leaders around making sure that they truly understand that they own this transformation, and a tech is a catalyst to get that to go forward, but they have to be thinking about all of the rest of those 7 areas to make sure that it really comes to fruition. I tell people, we throw around transformational time. The new buzzword is orchestration, right? Whatever the new buzzword is. But if you look up, one of the definitions of transformation is radical change.
Yes.
Right? That's what transformation means.
Yeah.
So is an SI really going to radically change your organization? I don't, like, you have to be thinking about all of those other parameters to radically change your organization. Otherwise, you shouldn't be calling it a transformation.
Agree.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Well, at least we can hear Harold again now.
Yes, that's transformational. Yeah. Anyway, what I was back to the ownership there, Amanda. The opposite is also true. So if the leaders are not actually taking the stand on the spots to explain and to communicate, if they do, then you also know it's right. And especially if they say, right, this, I'm sorry guys, I apologize. This hasn't go, very well. I need your help to solve this. If they take the ownership on the bad side as well, that's a big plus.
Oh yeah, we talk about that's actually the A in Alice is act with authenticity. And one of the things we tell leaders all the time is because we've been charged with the transformation, and if you are owning it, sometimes this comes across as like everything's going to be sunshine and rainbows, and this XYZ transformation is going to solve all of your problems and world hunger at the same time. Like that's how leaders sometimes come across. And what we tell them is you can sell a vision like that, the I is inspiring others, but acting with authenticity is talking about the journey and the hard stuff we're going to have to go through to get from where we are today to where we're going in the future. And that's part of that ownership, right? And being accountable for when things are harder than expected. Being very transparent and authentic about that goes a long way with the change.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Culturally, how do you assess in those early days whether an organization is ready? Is it intuition, or do you have tools, or what? How do you say, look, these guys are not ready for this?
So there's a combination of both. So one of the tools that we have is what we call a case for change workshop. And it's usually over a couple of days. And we go through the 8 different areas that I talked about earlier. And we ask maybe 8 to 12 questions, depending on the area, of what is important for the team. Okay. It's not answering how we're going to do it. It's just talking about collectively as this cross-functional group, what's important for you. We will know if an organization is not ready for that change if we get half of the people saying it's a 5 and half of the people saying it's a 1, right? If there's a huge divide in that room, this change is going to be very, very difficult. The other indicator during those case for change workshops is if the team in the room haven't even thought about these things yet. Like we ask a question like, is this important to you? And they're like, whoa, really? Is this going to be something that we're doing? Then we know, okay, there's going to be work to do here. So we just got one of those done with a client, and luckily there was a lot more alignment. And so we feel really good that they're going to go into the design extremely aligned and having clear priorities, but that's not always the case. The other thing that's not so tool focused, and I know you have a comment, Alex, but the other thing that's not so tool focused is we do a lot of interviews when we come on. So we typically do one-on-one interviews, and we ask a lot of questions about how's change gone in the past? What do you feel about this change? What do you expect from a change standpoint? How do you expect to be communicated to? How do you like to receive information? So we do various interviews. And then we collect that data to get an assessment of like, hey, change has gone really poorly in the past. So more than likely, people are going to be expecting that this one's going to follow a similar path. Right? So, yeah. So those are the 2 kind of areas that we lean on there.
My comment was more about how you described that process, and I was interested to know, have you ever said no to a client because you've just said, I know you're going to pay me, I know you want me to work with you, but this is not going to work. You don't know what you're doing. Have you ever done that?
So
you don't have to name them.
No, I'm not going to. No, that would be bad. We've had a couple of engagements where we've started with them and then walked away because of that. We are actually in active negotiations right now with a client where we might walk away too. So, and the reason is twofold. The way that they're going, I firmly don't believe they're going to be successful, right? So why pay us the money really if you're not going to be successful? And the other side of that coin is, am I going to put my team in a situation where it's a losing battle and they're not going to be successful in the end anyway? I don't want to do that to my team members. So those are usually the 2 different things that I'm looking at. But yes, we've had those issues. Yeah.
No, I think although those decisions are hard, so some of the decisions that me and Harold are taking at the moment are hard decisions, but they are the right thing for the business down the line. We're not chasing the dollar now, because if we chase the dollar, we'll make the wrong decisions. We want this in 3 years' time to be somewhere that people feel comfortable and want to be there, and they feel inclusive. And if we try and change that right now, it will become the thing that we don't want it to become. And I also think that for your team, if you select those roles, it also changes your reputation in the market, because you'll still be tarred with something that failed, even though it's nothing to do with you. It's on you anyway.
Yeah, and that's not why I started this business, is to be on failing projects. Like the whole reason I started this was to have success for my clients in their investments. And if that's not going to be the case, then the money's great, but it's not that great, right? That does not overrule the better business decision.
Oh, absolutely.
I think it's also great that you're looking out for your people, and that you're not putting them into a position that you know that they're going to, not they're going to fail, but it will look and appear like it's a failure, or they get, frustrations and, everything that's associated with that coming their way, which is just unhealthy. So from a leadership perspective, I think that's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've I've gone 40 years in business without owning my own business. Apart from when I was 14 and 15, I used to clean cars. I had my own bucket,
Yeah.
and I used to drive or ride, cycle to houses to mow lawns and wash cars. I
Nice.
also used to borrow my father's wheelbarrow. I didn't own my own wheelbarrow because we lived next um, to a field full of horses, and I used to collect horse manure and sell it door to door for people's roses. And if you can sell that door to door, you can do anything. Trust me,
Almost
at the age
anything.
of 15, you can knock on a stranger's door and sell that. Then
You
it's
probably had the cute factor too, as a 15-year-old going around. I would
probably
say,
back
as a
then.
mom, I probably would have
Probably.
bought it even if I didn't have roses.
But Harold wouldn't have done. But one of the things that that we said we'd talk about today, because it is a factor. It's something that we can't get away from. You are a woman,
Yeah.
and that's different. And kind of question is really, what are the challenges that you faced as a female leader in procurement? And maybe that might have been before you started your own business, and then maybe afterwards, running your own business as a female. Is that different still today? I think things have improved, but they're not where they need to be. That's clear.
Yeah. So I remember walking into rooms where I was the only woman and I was by far the youngest person in the room. Okay. So I had like this double-edged sword. However, I got coached early on in my career by some other really great women and some great men leaders that took me under their wing. And one of the things that always stuck with me is that, Amanda, you were invited into the meeting. Therefore, you're there to provide value, right? So I always had that in the back of my mind. So I never let that situation deter me. Like I have a seat at this table right now, whether it's virtual or physically, and I'm going to add value in this meeting. So that's something that I coach women on all the time. Like, don't diminish yourself because you're the only woman in the room. You're there for a reason, and you've made it to that room. So the other thing that I would say has been a key learning from me over time, and this is something that I think we all need to check ourselves with, particularly with women in procurement, we are not bashful people. Like, women in procurement are usually, and I'm going to use some words that maybe some other women don't agree with, but we're usually a little bit more stubborn. We're usually a little bit more direct. We're usually very good at diplomacy, right? But often what we get labeled as women in procurement is aggressive. Okay.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of, I actually received this feedback myself at one company, that I was perceived as aggressive and intimidating to other people on the team. But I've heard of many women in procurement getting held back from positions and promotions because there's a perception that they're aggressive. When their behavior, I'll give you an example. So this was a client, but there was a guy that walked into a room, and we were online. I wasn't there in person, but he walked into a room and he started going off, dropping F-bombs, yelling, like aggressive, right? But he didn't get that feedback. That was just how he is. But if a woman, could you imagine if a woman walked into the room and started doing that? So I think we need to be really conscious of women who are assertive and understanding that they're being assertive and not jumping to the conclusion that they're being aggressive.
Yeah, I remember 20 years ago, not using the words aggressive, but I can remember hearing the words, she's trying to be like a man.
Yeah.
And so it's not acceptable for a woman to be like a man, but it is acceptable for a man to be like a man. And I think things have changed. When I started at Wrexham Beverage Can 25 years ago, I was there was one lady in the office, and she was the secretary who the CPO made cry most weeks. And he said to me, "Look, you're in charge now, but whatever you do, don't recruit any women into it. They're just going to bring problems." So the first thing I did was I went and recruited a lady called Diane Bryden, who joined, and because I knew he was leaving. He didn't know, but I knew he was leaving. And by the time I left, it was 50-50. Now, I do think that we have made progress in procurement, in women participation, but probably not as much in senior levels yet. We still have a ways to go.
Yeah, and I've been cheering behind the scenes over the last year. I've seen a lot more women get into CPO positions than I think ever before. We still have a ways to go, and I think there's something kind of structurally off with procurement. When it comes to like university programs, let's just take that from a very foundational level. University programs, if you want to actually study procurement, you're going into a supply chain major for the most part. And when people think of supply chain, they're thinking of logistics, manufacturing, a lot of fields that are male dominated still to this day. So I think it's an interesting paradigm, right, of how we even start as an organization in universities, in those majors. It is perceived as a very male dominated field right from the beginning. So when I retire, Alex, that's something that I want to focus on, is seeing how we can change that, right? Like from the very beginning, I think there's a structural issue of attracting women to that major.
You talked about from early period, really, you've got some female mentors who have been advising and guiding and supporting you. Is it only female, or is it, or have you had male examples as well that have supported you through that process?
I've had, luckily, I already mentioned my husband. I mean, he's been my biggest cheerleader, but I've had a great mix in professionally of male leaders and female leaders. And what I tell women all the time, we get told we need mentors, right? Which I think is kind of a really awkward formal process. What I tell women all the time is look to those leaders that you love how they lead and build a relationship with them. So you're going to learn a lot more through those people than a formal mentor relationship. So I've had numerous on both sides, and still to this day, like one of the male leaders still reaches out like once a month, and he's like, "Hey, I'm looking for XYZ person on my team. Do you know of anyone?" Like, it's super collaborative, and I guess I've been blessed that all of those people have been willing to take me under their wings and help me along in my career.
Yeah. Look, first of all, your husband sounds amazing. I want to meet him. He's a great guy. I have to be careful what I say now because my wife is on here. I can see.
Oh yeah.
So
my wife.
So Sharon is on the call, and she's amazing as well. She is my biggest cheerleader and supporter in this, and has been throughout my career. You know, and I think having that support in your life, whether you are male or female, is absolutely important. I could not have done the job with kids that I did. I'm sure Harold's the same without that support.
Yeah.
And we just want to call it out. Your husband's amazing.
Thank you. I'll let him know. He's actually in the other room, so he'll be happy to hear that.
Excellent. When it comes to gender diversity in procurement and digital transformation projects, how important is that? So when you're setting up the team with the company, how do you ensure that you get the right mix of diversity?
I will say, and I like to use diversity in a very broad sense, right? So when you think about it, it's a diverse team is first of all, a cross-functional team. So people that have various different perspectives from where they're sitting in the organization. It also could be different ages. Like when we were moving from the AS400 at MGM, we had people who have been using that since the 80s, right? They were later on in their careers. They were very important to have in the project alongside of some of our newer team members who were just graduating from school, because they have a completely different perspective on what's needed and how the system was going to operate. We also then look at diversity of gender, backgrounds, etc. But I think when I think of like that core of what's absolutely needed is I try to get as many different perspectives in the room as possible, whatever that looks like as an organization. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we have a lot of discussions about that. So Richard Reynolds is on here, like me. He's at the other end of his career, same as me. And there are organizations when they're looking at projects, sadly, that forget the experience that sits in that brain, all the things they've done wrong, all the mistakes we've made, because it's the mistakes that you learn from. And having that balance of where people can learn from each other is so important, especially now as we're trying to transform things so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to learn and unlearn and move forward so quickly now. You need people to say, whoa, when that happened in 2005, this was a disaster. So don't go down there.
Yeah, and I actually, the people that I love the most, and by the way, I love Richard's comment in the chat. I really agree with that. A lot of women are highly collaborative and they foster great teamwork, etc. So thank you, Richard, for saying that. The point I was going to make is the people that I love having on the team are what I call convert champions. And those are the people that everyone knows, no matter what change is going on, Jane or Joe, they're just going to resist it. Like they don't adapt well when it comes to change. I love having those people on the meetings because of what you were just saying, Alex. Like they're going to ask really great, challenging questions. They're going to push the team to do better because they're considering everything that could go wrong. Where other team members are looking at what can go well, these team members are going to look at like, nope, that's not going to work because X, Y, and Z. So I always tell people, like, bring in the people that are not going to like this change. They're going to be your best asset on the team, because if you listen to them and understand where they're coming from, your project's going to result in better adoption, better ROI, etc.
Yeah. One thing that we still face and will continue to face is unconscious bias in many aspects. And I'm not just talking about gender here. There are many things that are going on in the world at the moment that make us biased without actually knowing that we are. And sometimes we know we're biased, but there are some times where we're not. How do you help your people to navigate through the melee of what is unconscious bias and help educate them when it exists?
It's a really good question, and it's a little bit hard to answer because I would say that I usually take a different approach depending on the situation, right? Because unconscious, it could be, I'll give you an example just from yesterday. Okay, so I've had the lovely experience of doing some coaching with particularly women in procurement, but it could be men in procurement too. But this particular person does a fantastic job of what they do day in and day out. Like they're reliable, they get results. So guess what happens? They get more work put on them, right? And in this particular situation, there's been a bit of a change in how things are going organizationally, and a lot more work was put on with no title and no comp, right? And I'm thinking to myself the entire time, the biases that are going on there, the bias that she's a top performer, right? And so that she can do it. But then also I'm thinking, would they do that if it was a guy in that role, right? And so the coaching was, no, like you have to ask the question, in that case, and stand up for yourself.
They can say no.
And they can always say no, right? But then at least you've asked the question. And you're going to learn a lot about their leadership through that process. But you can't just assume that it's going to be a no. So that's just one really recent example of what, how biases play into those situations and the coaching for that particular situation, at least.
Just from going back to your coaching skills then, so let's challenge this. So it's day 150 today for myself and Harold, and we had another couple hundred days before the 150 to start. So we've been at this for around a year now. He's probably going to tell me the exact date, but it's around a year, I think, since we first had the
planted in your mind.
Before we first had that idea, and then we had a few old fashions to help stimulate the creative juices. What would you, looking back to yourself now, so if you go back to when you were in those early days of starting Wonder Services, what would you have done differently, or what would you say to us in these early days? Because I kind of, at the moment, we keep saying, stick with it, don't worry, it's a journey.
Oh yeah. No, I think there's so many things running through my mind right now. Personally, what I would have done differently at Wonder Services, if I had the capital to do it, I would have purchased another consulting firm right out of the gate, because that would have accelerated our growth, and we would have a base to build on versus building it from scratch. So that's like my personal feedback for myself, like reflecting on my journey. But what I tell other entrepreneurs all the time is that the greatest asset that you have is being resilient and persistent, right? And in that, if you're resilient and persistent, you know that it's going to be a journey. It might take a little bit longer than you're expecting. I've heard that from almost every entrepreneur. Like, I thought this was going to happen in a couple of years, and it took a couple of years longer, but it eventually happened. And what ultimately comes out of that is every no is still an opportunity. Yeah. So my head of operations taught me that. I did not come with that in my mind when I started Wonder Services, but there were a couple of no's where she sat me down and she's like, that is okay, because it's opening a door for us to do something else, right? Now our resources aren't over here, they can go over here, and this is a better opportunity. So that, I would say, is like, people get really frustrated by the no's. And now I've learned that the no is just a not yet.
No, you're so right. I think we have to, myself and Harold have to reflect on where we are. We're 150 days on, and we had we have University of Nottingham, and we have the University of Maastricht in Belgium that wrote to us last week and said, we want to partner with you. We want to use you to help spread the word around supply chain sustainability. And that's something, you should, and Ecovadis and Carney and Barreau, and they all want to be involved, not because of what it is today, because what it is today doesn't interest anyone. It's what it will become.
Yes.
That is of interest to them. And if you start with something when it is small, when it's big, you're big with it. And that's what's key, to have members in 95 countries when we haven't really, well, we have done a lot, but in 150 days, that's quite impressive. But we've enjoyed it. Look, I find it inspiring speaking to you. I really do. But I do need to know. So I have A is authenticity and I is inspiring. What is L?
Lead with love.
Lead with love.
Which I know I freak people out at conferences because we're using the L word in corporate, but leading with love makes all the difference. It inspires listening, empathy, etc. So A is act with authenticity. L is lead with love. I is inspire others. C is create community, which I'm sure you guys adore that one. And then
Yep.
the E is engage purposely.
Engage purposely. That's one of the things I struggle with. I am a terrible listener. My wife, quite often when we're out, she notices that I've stopped listening to the person that I'm listening to. I'm thinking about something that's now more important to me. And she sees me going into this phase. I'll be, it's quite often happens when I'm talking to Harold, and she will kick me.
Yes.
She will absolutely kick me and say, stop it, stay in the room, be attentive, because that is so important, that engagement. It's
Oh yeah.
Alex would even say yes, and then just come.
And you're like, it wasn't a yes or no question.
Yeah,
Where is that
exactly.
coming from? And what we train leaders to do, just to, like when it comes to listening, what we train our leaders to do is every time they're communicating, it's not to share information, it's to receive feedback. Mm-hmm. And that little change in how leaders approach that, it changes something in their brains to be actively listening for that feedback versus trying to communicate a point. So maybe you can try that in your dinner events, like when you're.
I'm in training now. So this is after 40 years. I spent 40 years telling people what they needed to know, and talking to people, and now I'm a listener, sort of. but it's getting better.
There. No, we all can improve on that.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Harold. I've seen lots of chat coming through. Do you want to summarize for us and add your words of wisdom, because this is right in your space what we've been talking about today.
I love it. Yeah, and like you said,
after 22 years in NATO, he knows what he's doing.
There you go.
It's about delivering your mission, right? So whatever that mission is. So so great engagement in the chat. So we have a couple of questions. We were talking about old fashions, as you mentioned, Alex. So that's good as a point of inspiration. I just want to correct something. Yes, you might be right that we are currently in 95 countries, but the University of Maastricht is really in the Netherlands. It's not in Belgium. So just to straighten it out. It's close to the border. I think you can, throw a rock across the border, but it's still in the Netherlands. So important for me. So questions for you, Amanda, coming from Richard. So what strategies do you use to ensure that employees stay engaged and aligned with the company's vision during a period of transformation?
So I think I mentioned to you guys influencers, right? Meeting with influencers, that was part of the leader's role. One of the things that we talk about when we talk about engaging purposely is leveraging influencers in an organization. So influencers, you guys know influencers in social media, right? They're there to sell you something, to change your mind about something, to make you make a decision. We've applied that same framework to the approach that we take with influencers. There's 5 different types of influencers that we identify in an organization. And then we build a engagement plan around those influencers. So what does that look like? I mentioned a convert champion. They're an influencer. Those people we're trying to gather information from, but other influencers, they're out there engaging the organization in the change, so you're not the only one doing it. And those influencers people naturally follow. They're going to be looking to them anyway for that engagement, for that inspiration, etc. So it's a real key. People talk about stakeholders in change management. I think that's a bunch of crap, because usually when you identify stakeholders, it's a bunch of executives, which is fine, but those are not the influencers in an organization. Influencer is Jane, who is a super user today. And if Jane gets asked a question and she doesn't know the answer around to the change, guess what's going to happen? She's like, I don't know. They haven't engaged me. I'm not supportive of it. And then the 12 people she talked to today are all now not supportive of it because Jane's not supporting it. Yeah. So huge way. And Richard, I hope that answered your question, but like engaging your influencers is such a critical part of making sure that there's this constant heartbeat of engagement and alignment across the organization.
Yeah.
So
Thank
20
you.
years ago, we'd have said to that we need to find out who Jane is in the first week and fire her.
Different times.
Don't do that.
Different times. So,
Different times.
Amanda,
Different
we also
times.
talked about leadership, not owning it, and and that
Mhm.
obviously impacting the transformation. Another question is, in your experience, what is the most common obstacles an organization face when trying to implement transformational change, and how to overcome them?
Gosh, there's so many, but what I would say, there's a couple of things that I think are pretty consistent in this. A lack of alignment
Yeah.
in the organization. From there, it just tears holes in everything that you're trying to do. So if you have a lack of alignment, you're probably not, you're going to really struggle on that implementation. Lack of comprehensive approach, which I talked about already. Organizations saying that they're doing a technology implementation, but not thinking of the rest of it, I think is another big thing. And then the other area that I would say is a complete lack of focus on the change adoption.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Telling people what they're going to do without engaging them. I mean, does that go over well in your own life? It's not going to go over well at work either, right? I don't do a good job at change when people tell me I have to change without engagement. That's a natural response. It's actually a it's actually how people's brains respond to change. It's not just a me thing, you thing. It's how brains react to change. So we can't just tell people what to do. We actually have to go through and get their willingness to change and adapt that whatever you're trying to push forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Good
Yeah.
one. Last one we have from Richard here in the chat, or maybe you can read it there, is look into the future. How do you see organizational transformation evolving, particularly with advancements in technology and the changing nature of work? That's a change on itself.
So consulting firms made I can't say what I was going to say, a ton of money with these large, very long implementations. And they're still like, we're in conversations with the client today, and they're doing almost a 50-week implementation of a technology, right? Still exists today. But as technology, particularly Gen AI and those things come along, we're going to see a drastic shortening of that cycle, which means a lot more going through that pipeline when it comes to change, but they're going to be short bursts instead of a 50-week long journey. Okay.
Yeah.
Hugely different. Considering your organization of change burnout, like now you're going to be able to do a lot of stuff in a very short period of time. You need to be very conscious of change burnout. You also need to be thinking about, I talk about Gen AI a lot. There's some acceptance in the from leadership standpoint, but there's still a lot of concern from a day-to-day employee standpoint around what this is going to mean for my job. So doing very targeted implementations is what I usually recommend. Finding a use case, doing a very targeted implementation versus thinking you have this magnificent, huge strategy that you have to deploy, because if you go big on this, you're really going to struggle with the change adoption.
Yeah. I think the way you described that, though, and the importance of people and process and culture, that's probably, you're going to have to double down on that, because the speed of change is going to be faster, and you ignore people and processes at your peril. Just because a computer can do a bit of it for you, it's still going to work afterwards. It's still going to be used. It's still going to be engaged with the people. So smaller organizations like yourself that are growing, but still smaller than Accenture, and it's probably because of the way you engage, because of how you engage, because of Alice. That's what makes a difference. And those touch points that you've described is why people should use Wonder Services. And the wonderful Chief Wonder Officer that is yourself. Final comment really around that. How do people get into, I was going to say, how do people get into, there it goes. As if by magic, my Sherpa has lifted it up.
Seems like you might work together often. I don't know. He read your mind on that. I will say that if anyone wants to reach out to me, I'm a huge fan of using LinkedIn. We have a great community out there. You'll see me on Alchemie Network too, and hopefully we can engage there. But Wonder Services, the website that Harold put in, is a great way to learn more about what we're all about.
Yeah,
Fabulous.
listen, thank you so much. Before we go, what's your husband's name?
Steve.
Steve. From everybody here, we're all going to raise a glass to you tonight. You are an amazing person, and none of this would have happened without you. So we really appreciate you, and we can clip this and play it to him. We'll send you a copy of it. But
Okay, perfect.
He's
That
an
sounds
amazing
good.
guy, and we just want to call it out.
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye. Have a great
Bye.
day.
All right, take care. Thanks,
Bye.
Amanda. Thank you very much.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.